Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 59, Beyond All Other Gifts. We'll start off with some Star Trek news.
And then we'll get into our audience feedback right after our main topic, Beyond All Other Gifts. We're going to be talking about Star Trek Next Generation's first big Q episode, Hide and Q, continuing our conversation on Star Trek Next Generation's 35th anniversary. Please stay with us. Well, by the power of Q, I have summoned you once again.
I wondered what that flash of light was. And why I'm suddenly 10 years older with a completely different face and colored hair and a big bulky chest. That explains a lot. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. That's helpful.
I like the fact that you're going to have
I want to get there on my own, Kevin.
Okay. Well, I just like the fact that you're going to have a big bulky chest at 60. I think that's good.
Well, hey, we dare to dream.
Hey, you can.
Ricardo Montalban had a big bulky chest at some advanced age.
Right,
so,
right.
Those were not fake pecs people.
That's right. That was his real thing. And you can see the costume that he wore, clearly revealing his real chest, at the exhibit that we talked about earlier at the Skirball Cultural Center. And I believe you have a correction to an issue.
Yes, I do have a retraction to make as much as it pains me in the interest of honesty and accuracy. I said the Skirball Center was in New York City because I was reading an article about the exhibit in the New York Times. But the Skirball Center is actually on the exact opposite coast of the United States in the Los Angeles area. And you won't have to be cold if you go see the exhibit right now, because I don't think it's cold in Los Angeles at the moment.
Well, at least it's not snowing, probably, yeah.
There's no bombogenesis over there, I can tell you that much.
Oh, yeah, you got to listen to the last episode to know what a bombogenesis is. But yes. Very nice. But yes, I will say, yes, in your defense, you were reading it out of the New York Times, though I must say that at the top of the article, in all capital letters, it says Los Angeles. But, well, I'm not going to hold that
details.
Against you. Neither of us.
But you're right. I try to be accurate, and we try to bring our listeners the truth. So, yes, thank you for... I had told you I wanted to issue that retraction.
Yes, you had, and I hadn't brought it up for like an episode or two, and I remembered I needed to do that, so I wanted to get out of the way. But yes, the Skirball Cultural Center is closed right now as you're listening to us live, I guess, or as we're recording. It's closed through the end of January for COVID, so I don't know if they're going to extend the exhibits at all because of that, but they do apparently have it through the 20th of February. So if you're interested and you're closer to Los Angeles than New York, there you go. Sounds like it's going to be a cool exhibit. So speaking of that, Mike, I think we have some Star Trek news.
Speaking of Star Trek news, and we're going to get it right tonight.
We are.
The biggest piece of news I saw this week related to Star Trek was that Patrick Stewart has confirmed that season 3 of Star Trek Picard, which is now in production, is going to be its last season. But that was always the plan. So we now know that Star Trek Picard is going to be a big 3-act drama and story when all is said and done. And we'll see the second act beginning in March. Yep. And then season 3 will come along to wrap things up, I'm sure, in some epic and spectacular way, and give probably definitive closure to the character of Jean-Luc Picard.
I would expect yeah.
So that'll be quite the milestone when you think, I guess at that point, assuming season 3 airs in 2023, 37 years after this character first appeared on our television screens, we'll be seeing, presumably, the end of his journey. Although, of course, in Star Trek,
you never know.
The journeys never really end. So
you never know. He's going to have a cameo in some Kelvin timeline movie sometime, in the
Do you think
future.
If the Kelvin timeline continues, do you think they'll do their own take on TNG? I mean, there was speculation for a while that might be the next Kelvin movie.
Hey, man, I was talking a few episodes ago about potentially living to see Star Trek turn 100 years old, and when I think about that, I think it's nowhere near outside the realm of possibility. Anything can happen.
They could do it, although I'd rather see them do what the Prime timeline is doing, and just keep moving forward.
Yeah. Well, it could be. It could be. We will see what will happen. I don't know. But we do know what is happening right now in the toy universe for Star Trek, because Playmates, good old Playmates that we grew up with, has unveiled their latest Star Trek universe collection. And oh my goodness, is it cool. Have you seen these yet?
The Star Trek II action figure?
There's the Star Trek II era Spock and Kirk, and we just mentioned Ricardo Montalban's chest earlier. This chest in the movie.
Yes.
The chest in the movie.
Now in molded plastic.
Yeah, the chest in the movie was not plastic, but this one thankfully is. But it looks really good, and the face sculpts are pretty darn accurate. Especially Montalban's face sculpt is really great.
Yes, that's an amazing.
It's
likeness.
gorgeous. I mean, you can quibble a little bit with the other two, but even still, the style and design of the figures are so great. And then they have 3 from Next Generation. They have Picard and Riker and Data, and Picard's face sculpt is the standout of those 3. But they look really poseable. They have really cool knees and ankles and elbow joints. They look really poseable and really pretty and well done. There's also Saru and Burnham.
Oh.
So, but it's kind of interesting because this is like season 2 Saru and Burnham. So she's got her updo and everything, and they're in the old uniforms, and he's captain and she's number 1 and all that. Which is a little bit of an odd choice to me.
I wonder if production timelines had something to do with that.
Might have. Like, I don't know.
Maybe the artists at Playmates only had season 2 photos at the time.
Yeah, it's very possible. I don't know how long these have been in production. But I do like this era of them. And there's a great Hallmark ornament of the 2 of them together in these uniforms.
Yes, there is.
I mean, all of this is nostalgic anyway, so that works. And the pièce de résistance for me is the original series Enterprise, which is flipping gorgeous, with lights and sounds and quotes and all that stuff.
Now, see, that's I might have to cave, and because I got the Playmates Enterprise when Star Trek 2009 came out.
Oh, really?
And I love it.
Oh,
I love it.
Cool.
It makes the whooping alert sound, and it's got snatches of dialogue like "Fire all thrusters,"
right.
Chris Pine's voice,
right.
and it's fabulous. Yeah, I love it. So it was the only piece of merchandise I got from Star Trek 2009, but it was a good one. It is a good one.
This looks really good. My 2009 Enterprise model was the special edition double disc DVD that the saucer section of the Enterprise houses the 2 discs of the DVD. It's
nice.
Really cool. I like that a lot. So I kind of felt satisfied with that. But this one looks, I have a lot of Enterprises, but this one looks fantastic. And all the figures look really great. So the first wave of them will be available in July and in stores this fall. And additional figures and accessories scheduled for release early in 2023 will be announced later this year. So it's pretty cool. So
is the Enterprise part of that first wave?
I believe it is. Yes. I believe what we're talking about here is the first wave.
So July then. So
yeah, we'll have to look at it.
Your July 4th shopping list.
Yeah. So I'm excited about that. That's pretty cool.
Your Bastille Day wish list.
Your Christmas in July wish list.
There you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Although
Perfect.
I have to say Bastille Day, it's a deep cut with the holidays right there. I like that. Well, you've got another piece of Picard news.
Well, yeah, until we're waiting for our Bastille Day festivities, we can be looking forward to knowing that LeVar Burton, in an interview with Entertainment Tonight, reflects on his career in general, his groundbreaking role in Roots, and his work on Reading Rainbow, and his work in Star Trek. And as in connection with Star Trek, he mentions that he gives us every reason to think Geordi LaForge is going to show up on Star Trek Picard at some point before it is done. And so now we know that must mean it's 3rd season. He says, I can't find the exact quote just this moment, but he says something to the effect of, I think it's safe to assume that those people in Picard's life are still around, and they just may not be all together all at once, but they're all there.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing LeVar Burton reprise the role of Geordi in Picard, and I hope that means also that Gates McFadden will get to bring closure to Beverly and Jean-Luc's storyline
nice.
before all is said and done. But yes, I continue just to be so delighted to see LeVar Burton getting so much time in the spotlight these days.
So, we can always count on you for the LeVar Burton news, so that's fantastic.
Absolutely, I'm a fan.
I'm
a fan.
Well, we had a segment on the show for a while, a sort of unofficial sub-segment of Janeway news. Because we were getting so much.
So we need a LeVar Burton news.
We have it now, but to go back to our Janeway news segment, which we haven't had in a while, and I think everybody who's online probably knows this, but Star Trek Online has now brought Janeway back. Kate Mulgrew is doing the voice, and then also in the Shadows Advance part of the game, she'll be playing a mirror universe Janeway.
Mirror Janeway. What would Mirror Janeway be like?
Well, it's kind of interesting because it appears that from the character designs here, this is Taryn Marshall Janeway. She actually has 7 of 9's like Borg appliance looking things.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ooh.
So, and I mean, it's exactly 7 of 9's. It's, it's not similar. It's exactly the same. So I don't know what's up with that, but that's what it is. She is Marshall Janeway. And I will have to say that Admiral Janeway looks pretty flipping great. She has a snazzy Admiral uniform that I think is quite cool. It's all black. With maroon striping and everything, but it's really pretty, and her hair is amazing. She has all white hair and she looks fabulous. So, yeah.
How many iterations of Janeway has Kate Mulgrew played now? Because I know there were lots of episodes in Voyager where Janeway was quote unquote was a hologram or a illusion or a dream, and now we've got hologram Janeway and Prodigy, and now we've got Mirror Universe Janeway and Star Trek Online.
Well, I mean,
so what does Mirror Universe Janeway drink? She's not going to drink coffee.
I don't know.
Right?
She might drink.
She drink the blood of her enemies.
Probably so.
Hot.
No.
There's blood in that nebula.
That's possible. You never know. Mirror Universe is brutal. But anyway, so that's all the news that we can use. But yeah, Kate Mulgrew is now playing at least 4 major versions of Janeway over the course of Star Trek's history. So there you go. So I think it's now time to continue our Next Generation series with discussion of the episode Hide and Q. This is Q's first return since Encounter at Farpoint, which we discussed last time. And we went with this episode because we kind of started an idea. You started an idea last episode about really following the Q thread, and we liked that. So here we are, Hide and Q, and this is one of our favorites. You and I both.
Yes, I think it's not a lot of fans' favorites. I've gotten that impression over the years, and it is kind of talky. There's a lot of talking in this episode, and the show was still finding its way. This is like episode 10 of the first season, I think. But I really like the ideas they talk about, and I like the central dilemma of the show. I think I suggested last week that in all his various appearances, the character of Q, played by John Delancey, embodies some attribute or characteristic attributed to God.
Yeah.
Rightly, wrongly, we can discuss, but each one presents an image of God in the popular imagination, and subjects it to scrutiny.
Yeah,
I think in Encounter at Farpoint we talked about Q as accuser.
Yeah, and judge.
Yeah. Right.
And I would say unfair judge too, not righteous judge. Right.
Right. And so we talked about that. I think in Hide and Q is a tempter and a tester, and giving Riker the abilities of the Q, and the issue driving the episode is, well, I can't really say that because it is kind of clunkily constructed. He doesn't get the power of the Q till like the end of Act 2, but a central question of the episode is, what will Riker? Will he indulge those powers, and if so, what will he do with them? Right, and so that's the central story of the episode. that plays out.
Right. And you're right that it's a little bit clunky. I agree with that completely. However, the clunkiness is primarily in the construction and some of the dialogue. Particularly, I think that this is just another episode where Denise Crosby is dealt a dirty hand. She just gets the worst lines.
Q's penalty box.
The worst lines. You've gone too far, in the whole episode.
Right.
Terrible lines.
And then there's that whole thing about, if you weren't the captain.
Oh, I know. And what am I doing? Crying? There are so many weaknesses. And I think, again, the way they still don't know what to do with Worf and the whole scene with Worf, I'm just like, lose it. Cut it from the episode. I don't want to watch it again. It's so uncomfortable.
No kidding.
So uncomfortable. I mean, no,
this is sex, but I have no place for it in my life.
Oh, I know. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. I just the lines are awful for Worf, and the scene is awful, and it's again like, there's this sort of undercurrent of kind of misogyny that I feel in a lot of earlier Trek. And that definitely plays in this episode when, not only is there the thing between Tasha and Jean-Luc where she's like, if you weren't the captain, but then when Geordi looks around, the only person we see from his perspective is Tasha. And he's like, you're more beautiful than I ever imagined. And I'm like, dude, first of all, he can see her with his visor. Right. He doesn't have no idea what her face is like. That's ridiculous.
Right.
And second of all, why all of a sudden is Geordi like, oh, Tasha's so beautiful? I just...
Well, now, in the show's defense, in The Naked Now, he and Tasha share a moment in the observation lounge, I think, right after he's come back from the Tsiolkovsky. And you get the impression, or at least I did, that there's
maybe
interest
something
on Geordi's part. I don't think it's two-way.
That's possible. But again, it just felt like, women are there.
As I said, they're still finding their way.
Yeah. I mean, I did not like the way women were treated in this episode. Of course, they wrote Troy out of the episode, so she didn't have to take any of the abuse this week. But
Maria Sirtis is like, "Whoo, dodged a bullet."
Oh, mercy. But apart from those problems, which are rife within the episode, the animal things line that we have to say 3 times. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop picking on this episode. Again. I promise.
Vicious animal things.
Animal things. Animal things. Animal things.
Although I do like Brent Spiner's delivery of, you may find that aesthetically unpleasant. I could just file a computer report on that. That's a nice moment for Jada.
That was great. Yeah. It was really good. But yeah, the episode overall, though, I like what it does with the character of Q. I had a note. Actually, I went through and found my old notes. I have lots of notes on this episode from years ago.
Yeah.
And in 2016, I wrote, how does this episode change the character, meaning Q? How does this episode change the character of Q? And I find it interesting, we're talking about how Q sort of represents these different images of God. But at the same time, he also, and we talked about this episode too, kind of rides that line between like God and the devil, or God and the tempter and the accuser, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's right there with Riker in the desert. It's like Jesus and the Satan in the desert,
Oh, yes. He is a tempter in the desert. And what's really interesting too about that is that he comes in so much of the episode dressed in Christian symbology. We certainly have that scene where he shows up as the monk, and throwing his crosses at everybody. But what I had never noticed before this viewing of the episode, because we don't see specific religious symbols very much in Star Trek at all.
That's true.
But we have him actually having a cross in that scene. But then in the desert, his tent and his standard have Christian symbols all over them. They have crosses. The top of the standard is a double cross, and they're fleur de lis all over because it's French. But the fleur de lis is a Christian symbol too, and it's just but there are crosses all around the edge of his tent.
Interesting.
And I'd never noticed it before. And we talked. I think it was last episode when we've talked about it a few times, but the difference between Jesus as he comes to us, right? Jesus who is we talked last episode about Jesus losing to win, right? Being victorious in his loss, and being sort of coming to us as sort of the loser, the underdog, the outcast, right? And championing those people, as opposed to Jesus the conqueror and Jesus the colonizer. And I feel like it's subtle, and I don't know that it's intentional, but it's just interesting to me that this Q, this military Q, who's a what's his rank? Is he a major or a?
He's a field marshal.
A marshal
outranks even an admiral.
Yeah, who's this Q? Who's a marshal who outranks even an admiral, right? Is sitting under a cross and next to a cross and surrounded by crosses and fleur de lis and all these things.
Can you say more? You called Jesus a colonizer. I'm not sure.
No, I'm saying that Jesus is not a colonizer. Jesus is not right.
Thank you. Okay.
Like he doesn't come to have dominion in that sense, in that way.
Right.
And so what David was saying a couple episodes ago was about the fact that if your Jesus is, if you want to have power in this world, you have to come up with a different Jesus. And so I found that fascinating, just that Q incorporated that in this episode. Intentionally or not, probably not at all. But for us, I think it has to hold significance.
Yeah. Well, another way Q is very different from Jesus in this episode is the moments of utter derision he has for humanity.
Right.
Oh, your species is always suffering and dying.
Yes.
Then again, you're what? You're only human. And Tasha says, we're lowly animals tormented and performing for their amusement. And for sure, I don't think she's wrong about that. Q has an interest in Riker, it said, right? And there is an element for sure in the episode of Q and the Q continuum apparently have some trepidation, some fear, some intimation of humanity's potential, and Q even tells Riker at one point, "You may even grow beyond us at some point." But for many other moments in the episode, there's this. So maybe it's bravado, but I think there's this strange mixture of respect for and derision for humanity, and the scorn with which he treats all the characters, really, calling Worf microbrain and so forth. But especially this idea that humans are so far beneath the Q.
Right.
So Q has an interest in humanity, and it made me think of Psalm 8 in the scriptures. What is humanity that you are mindful of them? What are mortals that you care for them? God's interest in us is a caring interest, and there's no scorn, there's no derision. God's interest is to love us and care for us as we are, and then to make us more than we are. So there's something about the Q continuum there, maybe, but it's all out of a motive of for our good and to make us the way God intended us to be, as opposed to Q, whose interest in us is just sometimes just as playthings, and except for Riker, just as objects of amusement, as Tasha said.
Well, and what's interesting is I'm glad you bring that up, because Q's interest in humanity is completely different from the interest of God.
Yeah.
I think we see in this episode a little more of his interest in humanity, in humanity's potential, right? And in the fact that they can be more, and that they're becoming more, that they're at a certain stage in their evolution, which I find interesting, because there's a sense in Star Trek sometimes that, human beings of the future have arrived, right? But there's a lot of language in Next Generation that says we're getting there. We're on our way.
Right.
And this episode has a couple of those scenes.
Yep.
But Q's interest in that is such that he wants to bring Riker into the Q, and it's like, why does he want to bring Riker into the Q? How does that, bring him forward? Well, part of it is to get Picard out of the Enterprise, right? Is to take away Picard's command, which is, in a sense, to sort of try to put a stop to humanity's advancement. That somehow the Enterprise crew is particularly special. But also to take that potential and own it and control it, sort of absorb it
Yes.
into the Q and make it a part of what we're
Yes.
doing, right?
Yes.
And that is very much that colonizing mentality. That's
Yeah.
very much that mentality of well, it's the Borg mentality, of gaining power by mining others for what we can get from them. And
Right.
and the idea that if he can corrupt Riker, then it's almost like retrying the whole trial of the first episode over again. If he can corrupt Riker, then human beings are faulty and frail and corruptible, which of course we are. But these are our exemplars, and thankfully they don't fall for it. Although Riker almost does.
Well, Riker's really torn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's got this power, and they go to save the people who are trapped in the cave where this disaster has taken place, and there's the dead girl, and Data says, "Commander, if you really do have the power of the Q," which in that moment, I think totally unwittingly, but Data's in the tempter role there. If
Right.
you are the Q, if you are the Son of God. So there's some interesting scripture jazz, as you like to say.
Right.
So it raises questions that are often raised when we're talking about theodicy in theology,
Mm-hmm.
of the problem of why is there suffering when God is all powerful and all good,
Right.
and all knowing and all those omni attributes.
Mm-hmm.
Why do bad things still happen to good people? Those kind of questions. Riker doesn't resuscitate the girl.
Right.
Just as Jesus didn't heal every person who was blind or lame or
Mm-hmm.
bring everybody back from the dead.
Right.
Lazarus and the widow from Nain's son, I think, are the only two that we know of.
Right.
But so why, when you have all this power, why would you not use it? And Riker wrestles with that. I could have saved that girl.
Right.
So I guess it raises questions of, is God like that? Is God self-consciously limiting God's own power? And if so, why? And does God feel bad about that at all? Did Jesus have regrets that he couldn't heal more people, feed more people, make more blind people see while he was walking the earth?
Right. Well, I think you're hitting on something that I think is quite right, in that we talk about that Q kind of has this God and devil thing that he does. And I think the tempter part of it definitely does kind of give that Luciferian image. But if we're talking about how Q represents something, or a false idea that people have of God, or a false version of God, then I think maybe the undercurrent here is that godlike power, or the power of God, is unlimited, both in its potency and in its application. In other words, that God would have the ability to do whatever God wants at any time for any reason, that God's power is somehow completely unrestrained. And I think that is a misconception.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I think the reason for that is, boy, I don't know if I know the reason for that fully. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. I'm going to count on you to sort of fill in the gaps here. As I always say on the show, God gets what God wants. God is sovereign, and shalom will be accomplished. And God knows that, and God is doing that through us, and through the workings of the Spirit. But also that there's something about the power of God that is restrained, not limited, right?
Yes.
God's arm is not short that God cannot reach.
Right.
God's ear is not heavy that God cannot hear. But there is a wider view that God has of what is and is not appropriate in terms of that kind of intervention. And I think we see that in this episode, that if everything was just snapped into existence the way we might want it to be, it wouldn't be what we want it to be. Wesley's adulthood, where he looks like looks like He-Man instead of Wesley. It's,
I don't know why they didn't find him.
I don't know. I mean, look at that guy and look at Will Wheaton now. But anyway, it's like, what the heck? But that version of Wesley, that's not Wesley. grown into a man.
Right.
That's Wesley.
Clearly.
Yeah, right. That's Wesley poured
Yeah.
into the mold of a man without actually having
Yeah.
become one. When Geordi is healed of his blindness and he's like, I don't like who I'd have to thank.
Right.
This isn't without cost for me. And I don't want to just be snapped into this thing. I mean, it's great. It's cool, but I'd rather not, have it given to me in that way.
Yeah. They reject Riker's gifts because it's a question of integrity at that point, right? Yeah. When you mentioned Geordi's line, I don't like who I'd have to thank. The price is a little too high.
Right.
It's kind of like when Jesus says, "What does it profit someone to gain the whole world but lose their soul?"
Right. And what the soul is, I think, is a lot of a question that Star Trek explores quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Yeah.
What a soul is, how we get it and how we keep it, how we maintain it, how we have one instead of losing it. I think back to the original series episode, This Side of Paradise, where everything is great and perfect, but we've lost our soul because we don't have to work for anything, because there is no challenge. So we don't grow, we stagnate. And that's very much what's going on here, that there is a sense, and I think this is a Christian idea too, that we do have to grow in the sense that we need to work through things and work for things and earn things rather than just having them, handed to us. Not in the sense that we must earn our salvation.
Right.
But that part of salvation is what we call sanctification, which you and David talked about on your episode that you flew the ship for. That process of growth that requires our investment, that requires our engagement, because if we don't earn it, it's not real. Even if it's, we can't get it. I mean, we can't have anybody snap their fingers and give us righteousness, or wisdom or experience. Anything that we could have that might look like that is an affectation thereof if we haven't earned it.
Yeah, you're right. And even Paul, the Apostle Paul, talks about working out your salvation with fear and trembling, right? He never questioned. I mean, Paul preaches grace, but still realizes there is that process of sanctification. Something from my tradition that may be helpful here, in one of our official statements of faith, the Westminster Confession, we talk about the much neglected duty of improving our baptism, meaning our baptism is not something we've earned in our tradition, or something we claim credit for, but we still nonetheless have a duty to grow into it, to grow into that identity that we are given as a free and gracious gift in baptism.
And I would say this: it's not just a duty in the sense of obligation. It's that, look, there's a lot here for you to uncover. If you'll just uncover it. Sure, you can go to heaven when you die or have unity with God or whatever, because Jesus saves all, right? And you will be rescued, sure, ultimately. But what kind of salvation are you going to experience here and now? That's kind of up to you. And the Spirit is calling, the Spirit is leading, but you've got to follow and you've got to pursue. And if you do, then there are great gifts for you. It's not requirements, that God is putting down to make yourself good enough. It's opportunities for flourishing. If you will invest, you will flourish more. And that's what that's about.
You're making me remember a meeting of a church body I went to once where a fellow pastor stood up and said, we were discussing, debating, arguing about some issue or other, and I forget the exact context, but she stood up and said to the assembled body there, yes, the Bible says, if for this life only we've hoped in Christ, then we are of all people most to be pitied. But we haven't hoped for Christ for less than this life. That there is so much of, as you say, the salvation to be experienced here and now, as well as whatever waits for us after.
Yeah, I would say the inverse is also true.
Yeah.
If for this life we have not hoped for Christ within this life, then we are also to be pitied, because we missed out on a big portion of the gifts that God has to give to us.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and the good gifts that come from God are gifts that come from the experience. The journey is the goal, the journey is the destination, all that, that to help us. I think salvation in a here and now sense is helping us to uncover the beauty and the truth and the goodness of this life and of this place that we live and of the things that we can grow into, if we do thoughtfully engage our lives in ways that seek after being the hands and feet of Jesus, being the embodiment of God on this earth in a real way, not in the sense of like Riker has. He's that.
Right.
This is the temptation. This is the temptation from the Garden of Eden. When the serpent tells Adam and Eve, if you eat of this fruit, you'll be like God. Right. The idea is you'll be unfettered. You'll be able to do whatever you want. You'll see things the way God does. God is hiding things from you. No, God's not hiding anything from you.
Right. And that's so critical to the theme of this episode. That's something I wanted to bring up is Q plays games in this episode. And that is the image of God many people have.
Yes.
That God plays games with human beings. God doesn't move us around like pieces on a chessboard.
Right, right.
God doesn't play tiddlywinks with us. Whatever game metaphor you want to use, God doesn't do that with us. But Q certainly does. I mean, Q frames it as this quote from a real philosopher, David Hartley. Yes. Nothing reveals humanity so well as the games you play. And Q says, well, he was almost right. It's really how you play them.
Right.
But Q not only plays games, he doesn't play them fairly, and I think there is this idea that God is somehow not playing fair with us. But God doesn't treat us as again, God's interest in us is for our good. I think this connects to what we were talking about earlier, the problem of theodicy, which, after many thousands of years, we're not going to solve here on a Star Trek podcast. But God restrains God's self out of respect for the freedom God has given us. We could not handle God barging in and taking over and taking names and kicking our butt, that God wants us to freely respond. And so I think that what we experience as, why doesn't God do something about this? In some mysterious way that I can't fully explain and don't claim to fully understand, it's God's respect for us that Q doesn't have, that giving us space for that freedom God has truly given us to be free agents,
right?
Free moral agents.
Right. It's exactly the inverse of the way Q speaks of us. Your species is always suffering and dying.
Right.
It's that indifference. I think.
Yes, that utter apathy toward it that the God of the Bible surely doesn't have. In Exodus, God says, I've heard my people suffering and I've come down to save them. And then in Jesus, God comes to save again, from suffering and dying.
And that's true too, that I think people can feel that when they're suffering, they wonder where God is.
Yeah.
And I want to say to you, if you've ever felt that way, Fred Rogers is a big hero of mine. And he used to, when he would meet somebody who, was very ill or was suffering in some manner, he would ask that person to pray for him, because he said, because they're suffering, they must be closer to God. The idea that, and I think that was both something he believed and also something he was speaking into that person's life to edify them, and to tell them that God is close with you in your suffering. God is not far away. God is not ignoring you. God is not indifferent. God is right there with you in your suffering.
Right.
And this is the whole message of the embodiment of Christ coming to suffer along with us and being the Emmanuel, God with us, that God is close to us and right there with us when we're suffering, feeling our suffering, having compassion, having empathy for us in that. And as far as, the question of theodicy, which is why do bad things happen to good people, basically. I always go back to one of my favorite bands, Stavesacre, and their riff on scripture. When Mark Solomon, their lyricist, writes, I couldn't tell you why good people suffer. I couldn't tell you why the bad ones run free. God showers blessings on the righteous and the wicked. I only know that covers me.
Nice.
And I've quoted that on the show before, but it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
That God does give everybody access to blessing. And of course, Jesus tells us that in the life there will be suffering. And so many people have suffered so much in recent history. People with whom, who are connected to this, to me and my life, and who are presently suffering right now. And I'm sure to yours as well.
Sure.
And everybody listening, I know you've probably suffered in recent history. It's very, very true. And, all of that is part of the human experience. It's part of the world that we live in now. It's part of the time that we're in now. But the good news is that we are not alone in our suffering, and that we are not dealt with indifferently, like chess pieces, as you say, the way Q looks at it. He quotes Shakespeare. He says, "Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." And Picard says, "Oh, I see. So how we respond to a game tells you more about us than our real life, this tale told by an idiot," right? And I think life can feel that way. I used that clip once in a video presentation I did in college on nihilism. The idea that life is a walking shadow. But that's what life is. That's what life is if we aren't invested in the journey and earning the things that we receive. If Jesus was here and was not actually literally tempted the way we all are, if he didn't actually literally suffer the way we all do, his life was but a walking shadow. It was a pageant, because he didn't have any real investment in where he was. And that's the same thing that can happen to us. When we get so caught up in our religiosity, so heavenly minded we're no earthly good, or when we get so caught up in wealth, or when we get so caught up in earning the things that other people say are worth earning and not losing in the right places so that we win ultimately, right? Not allowing ourselves to lose parts of the game so that we can actually accomplish something and earn something better in life, in righteousness, to store up those treasures in heaven, as it were, right? Because we don't always make it down here. If we're not doing that, then we are but a walking shadow and a poor player. And I think that's the difference. The Q offers, Picard says he's a flim-flam man. I love that. Right. I love that line from Worf. Flim-flam? Flim-flam?
Doran sells it.
Sells it great. It's great. It's wonderful. But, it's that's the thing. That's the con that Q is selling in this episode. That's the con that he's selling, is that this fake life that he can give you with a snap of his fingers is worth the living. And the truth is, it's just not.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of his very first lines in the episode when he shows up as the Aldebaran serpent, 3 snakes on a ball, which is not one of the better visuals TNG ever did. But
it's memorable.
He says, when Picard is saying, we'll deal with you after we save these people, and he thunders, as many people imagine God does, "My business with you takes precedence.
Yes.
If my magnificence blinds you," and then he looks like John Delancey, right? In a Starfleet uniform. So that's how Q views. It's a con, that he's like us and he's lording it over us. But God really did become one of us in Jesus of Nazareth. Right. And that's the beauty of it. You talk about my business, right? My business is more important. Right.
Again, I keep going back to Christmas, but Marley, in A Christmas Carol, I know. But Marley in A Christmas Carol, says, business, Scrooge says, "You were just such a good man of business, Jacob." And he says, business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. All the work of my life was but a drop in the comprehensive ocean of my business. And I think that business, the common welfare, our fellow humans, that day-to-day life, that is God's business. God's business does not take precedence over that. that is God's business, because God's business is about the formation of our humanity right here, right now, and how we form a human community with other people and how we share love with other people. That is God's business. God's business doesn't supersede. And what's interesting is that at the end of the episode, they've been en route the whole time.
Right.
They've been en route the whole time. They do get to carry out their business just the same. Yeah. Just the same. And so I don't know what to do with that regarding Q's character, but it is interesting. But yeah, I really, for all its faults, I really enjoy this episode. I've got,
Me too.
Notes and notes on it from years past. And
that scene you rehearsed with Picard and Q, that's where I fell in love with Picard.
Oh, yes.
I thought, okay, I like this guy.
That is one of those scenes that I recorded the audio of and listened to over and over and over, that I've had for years. And I just love it. And I think it's a great little dialogue. I used it in my original paper on Star Trek. I used that scene. So Hyde and Q goes way back to the beginning for me, for this whole journey. Yep. So it's a great episode, and we'll see what else we find in the next one. But I think it's time now to get to our audience feedback section.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So our audience feedback this week comes from Deacon William Necessary, and he told me that I could use his name on the show, so I'm actually using it. But Hi, William. How you doing? Or Bill, actually. I think he likes to be called Bill, so hi, Bill. But anyway, so Bill writes, my wife and I watched Woman in Motion last week. I had no idea. I had no idea Nichelle Nichols was so involved in NASA. What a great movie. And he said he talks about the film showing the brief clip from the recruitment films. And she said, I have to search for it on YouTube because I got to see the whole thing. But I love that. And he actually said he saw that movie because of listening to our episodes. So,
fabulous.
Yeah, that makes me really happy. So, we wanted people.
It makes me glad we've introduced somebody to that movie. Yeah. And, we're recording today, January 28th. It's the 36th anniversary of the Challenger disaster.
Oh, my gosh.
And
I didn't know that. 2
of the astronauts that Nichelle recruited for NASA were all part of that crew. And so that's, of course, very sad.
Yes.
But in the context of all she did to diversify the astronaut corps that we talked about, and her commitment to space being for all people, I'm just so pleased that William has seen that film, that Bill has seen the movie now. And if other listeners still haven't, it's on Paramount Plus. So if you can watch Discovery and Prodigy and Lower Decks and Picard, you can watch Women in Motion too. Fabulous film.
Oh yeah, it's really wonderful. And I tell you, it's very moving. I did not know that at all. That's amazing that it worked out that way, that we're on that anniversary. I remember being at my school as a kid, and we were watching that live on the television, as so many kids across America did. And I remember the image of that shuttle exploding, and I remember trying to remember. I remember searing into my memory how the explosion happened and the shape of the smoke. When it exploded once and then another piece went off and exploded again. And I was like, I've got to remember this for the rest of my life. I've got to put this in my head, because I knew I'd seen something incredibly momentous. And incredibly big.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I did not see it live. Whatever class I was in at the time, we weren't watching it. But I got on the bus to go home. I was in 8th grade at the time, and somebody had said, there was a fire on the shuttle. So I didn't even know the full details till I got home. Wow. Because I was wondering, I hope the astronauts got out okay.
Right.
And I was a new Star Trek fan at that point, and it just hit me all the more. I mean, it just because the shuttle was at that point the closest thing we had to Star Trek in real life. And the symbol of how great the future was going to be, and the adventure of boldly going and all, and so that, I mean, actually, a Star Trek novelist, Dayton Ward, points out every year on his blog. The Fog of Ward, which you should check out. But he points out this week is a week of very solemn memories for NASA, because there's the Challenger is January 28th. the day before, January 27th, is the anniversary of the Apollo 1 fire. And then February 1st is the anniversary of the Columbia disaster.
Wow.
So we're in this week of remembering how risky it is to go boldly, and how everybody who did that, everybody every astronaut who's given their life for the program, as well as those, of course, who haven't, fortunately, the many, many more who haven't died, they're all doing it because they believe it's worth doing, and it's worth doing not just to do it, although there is the element of just let's see what's out there, but there's the element of it's going to make life on Earth better for everybody. And Nichelle Nichols talks about that in Woman in Motion. And so, yeah, it's just it's a time, I think, a week for everybody, but especially Star Trek fans who care about such things as space and science and discovery and making life better, and Christians who care about those things too, to reflect and to think, what might we do? We're not going to be astronauts, all of us, or many of us maybe, but what can we do to pursue those same goals?
Yeah, and it puts context, as you're saying it right there. It puts context to Kirk's words. Risk is our business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like that really makes it real. That really, because it's risk is our business. I mean, it's not just in space travel, but it's in life. The business of life is risk. We do take a risk. I've said many times that turning to another person and saying hello can change your whole life, because those connections that we make change our lives. But every connection we make, every time we choose to love, that's a risk.
Right.
Every time you walk out the door, every time you get in the car, that's a risk. You have to take risk in order to live, in order to make it. And like you said, in this world you will have suffering, but I've overcome the world. In this world, we will have suffering, and whatever goal we're working toward, there's going to be setback, there's going to be disaster, there's going to be tragedy, there's going to be failure. But failing for the right reasons is always a good goal, as we talked about last episode. But also that knowing that there is potentially a cost involved in what we do helps us to think about whether it's worth the doing, because everything we do is a risk. The question is what risk we're going to take. And I think we should definitely honor the lives of those people who did risk all. I recall Nichelle talking about this in the film and tearing up, to this day, or to very recent days, tearing up about the loss of those people, because there were people she knew, and that reminds us of the humanity. We hear about loss and death all the time on the news. But then when you experience it in your own life, it hits even harder. And just recognizing that we're all going through that to one degree or another, and we all will go through that to one degree or another, just another thing that makes this world and this human race a place where we can understand that our similarities are greater than our differences. So, yeah. So thanks, Bill. I didn't expect that to go in that direction, but thank you for for that very positive comment, and for leading us in that beautiful reflective direction unwittingly. Thank you for listening, and all of you, thanks for listening. We greatly appreciate your support and everything that you do. So, Mike, what do we got coming up next episode?
Next episode, we'll be reviewing A Moral Star Part 2, the resolution to the current Prodigy cliffhanger.
Yes, I'm excited about it. It's going to be season 1, episode 10, halfway through the season, which is amazing. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And I hope everyone will join us for that. In the meantime, please like, comment, and share. And if you like what you're hearing, please write a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about the show and let us know how we're doing.
Also, send us your feedback and questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to include your feedback on the show.
And you can now support the show by subscribing. You'll get early access to each week's topical episode, plus outtakes and bonus content. Just click the subscribe button wherever you listen. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time,
I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin C. Neese. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.